So hello and welcome, parents. I've met you students already. Um, Very interesting interviews, great bunch of candidates. So very nice to meet all of you. If you come here, I'm going to be kind of the biggest thing in your lives for the next 4 years. So you probably need to know what you're getting yourselves into, right? So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my background and about my philosophy with this course, and a bit more about what you can expect from the course and from the school. So when I was your age, there was nowhere to go to study any of this stuff. A synthesizer like this was the thing of dreams. You know, these were owned by rich rock stars and high-end recording studios and record labels and university experimental music departments. And there's no way, you know, somebody like me could dream of ever getting my hands on one of these. I actually graduated from high school at 16 in London, and I went to work in a fruit and vegetable shop so that I could help support my electronic music habit, which at that point was sort of was more an aspiration than anything. And London in the mid to late 70s was a very exciting place to be. There was a lot going on out in the streets. This was the winter of discontent. There was rioting going on. I was known to the police, and there were general strikes, and there were power outages and garbage collection issues. And on any street corner, you could find a dumpster with the most amazing stuff in it. And it was in one such dumpster in South London in 1978 that I found my first synthesizer. It wasn't in this box, it was just a circuit board, but I built the box and I sat in my bedsitter all through the night playing with my first synthesizer. My next acquisition was this rather lovely vintage Revox tape recorder. And the neat thing about the Revox was that it was a stereo tape recorder, but you could record the left channel and then bounce it to the right channel while adding a new track. So given that my synthesizer was monophonic, I would program a kick drum sound, and I'd sit there playing the kick drum all through for 5 minutes, and then I'd wind the tape back and bounce that over to track 2, program a snare sound, and put the in between. And this was not a very reliable way to play drums. So I was very excited when I got my hands on this beast, which was the Peabody 340-380 wave computer, which was originally designed to turn Tangerine Dream's light show on and off. It was a computer that where each program had a pair of microcassettes that you would load in these slots in the front. So when I performed live with this, I had a rack of microcassettes. And if I wanted to load up, let's say, airwaves, I took airwaves A and B and I put them in the slots, type load return on the keyboard, and the cursor would blink for 52 seconds. And after that, there was roughly a 50-50 chance that the program would execute. And if it didn't, I had to go back to the beginning and start again. So I got pretty good at talking to small crowds of electronic music fanatics. And I put this together as a live show, which now included not only the computer and the Revox, but some Super 8 film projected behind me on a screen. And the film was things like bombed out buildings in East Berlin and vivisection experiments. And it was not exactly a toe-tapping night out to go and see a Dolby gig. And I'd look out at this sea of sort of young faces in guys in anoraks with dandruff problems. And it wasn't exactly the punk rock gigs that were going on with people pogoing in the mosh pit and things were a lot more thrilling than my concerts. But I had a small and very fanatical audience, and I was able, use on the strength of my keyboard playing with other bands, I was able to save enough money to make an album. And it was released in the UK, and it won some awards and got great reviews and sold about 3 copies. And but I was not discouraged by this, partly because I was also very interested in filmmaking and always had been. And there was a new phenomenon in the USA called MTV. And in the early 80s, MTV had just gotten into the major cities for the first time. And it was very influential. Hip people were staying home to watch music videos instead of going out to concerts and gigs. So And the good news was that if MTV showed your video, then the radio would pick up on it and start playing it as well. So with this in mind, I wrote myself a storyboard for a music video, and this is how it went. Etc. So the song came out and it went in the top 5 of the Billboard charts, and the album went gold, very much to my astonishment. Overnight I was sort of a pop star, and this was actually quite uncomfortable for me, but what was the coolest about it was that a lot of my boyhood heroes got in contact with me and said, hey, really like your song, man, why don't you come and play with us? And among those were Herbie Hancock and Stevie Wonder and Howard Jones, with whom I performed at the Grammys the year that I was nominated. And so it was absolutely thrilling to be playing with guys like this. Although the best part of the whole experience was the night before the Grammys. We were in Stevie Wonder's studio in LA recording the backing track because we were miming on TV. And Stevie, who is usually surrounded by a huge entourage, disappeared at about 2 in the morning before we'd finished the recording. And I went to look for him in the corridors of his recording studio, and I heard some piano coming out of what was effectively a broom closet. And I walked in there, and it was a small room full of filing cabinets and an upright piano, and Stevie was on his knees playing some blues piano with nobody else in the room. And I was kind of astonished to be alone with him for the first time. And I said, Stevie, we've really got to get this recording finished. The producers want us to finish up our medley with a version of the national anthem. You know, have you thought about how to do that? And he said, oh, I haven't really thought about that. How do you think we should do it? And I said, I think if we got like a slow beat going and we did a sort of slightly R&B version of it. And he said, oh, we shouldn't do that. I said, why not? He said, Marvin did that at a basketball final a couple of years ago. And he went out on the ice with a TR-808 drum machine and a bass player, and he did this amazing version of the national anthem. And Marvin never got on TV again until the day he died, because the networks couldn't handle a black man singing a sexy version of the national anthem. And I said, that's just terrible, but it must have sounded amazing. What did it sound like? And Stevie just like felt the keys and started playing, channeling Marvin Gaye, like from memory, the way that he performed the national anthem. And in between lines, he was like beatboxing the TR-808. And I'm standing there leaning against the wall in this little broom closet with Stevie Wonder playing, channeling Marvin Gaye, and my heart stopped. And you know, I would have cut off a limb very happily to have recreated any one of the licks that he sang or played. And then he said it was kind of like that, and he got up and felt his way out of the room, and I'm standing there just quaking. So that was really my best memory of the whole thing. And my career has been like a bunch of the most amazing memories like this strung together. Shortly after that, I was invited by another one of my heroes, David Bowie, to play in his band at Live Aid. I shot this with a Brownie camera from behind my keyboards on stage at Wembley. Another of my teenage idols was Pink Floyd, and Roger Waters, when he did The Wall in Berlin, asked me to play the part of the crazy Scottish teacher on Another Brick in the Wall. And so I got to play a synth solo in place of David Gilmour. I got to play the solo on one of the first ever performances of a wireless MIDI synth in a duet with Cyndi Lauper. So needless to say, towards the end of the 80s, as the music industry was starting to show its cracks, I got a little bit disillusioned with the whole rock star thing, and I wanted to branch out in the music that I was playing, and my record company just wanted me to churn out more hits. And so I actually veered away from music altogether and more into technology. I'd been using, instead of one-off computers like the PPG, I was now using Macintoshes with off-the-shelf software. And I would consult with those companies, people like DigiDesign and Opcode, and I would input ideas for new features to them. And I was living in LA, but I would go up to Silicon Valley to consult with these companies. And I got more and more interested in new applications of music in different areas. And among them were computer games. I did some soundtracks for a number of games for PC and Sega and CD-ROMs and things like that. And also, believe it or not, virtual reality. And it's hard to imagine that this was, 35 years ago now. But in 1992, I created a VR music program called the Virtual String Quartet, which was an installation at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And what you would do is you would put on a pair of goggles and you found yourself in the midst of a computer-generated string quartet, 4 characters. And as you moved around the space, you would have the sound spatialized in your head. So you would put your head next to the cellist and you'd hear the mix convolved around your head. And if you tickled the cellist, he would start playing Appalachian bluegrass instead of Mozart. And so this was installed in the Guggenheim in New York, and there was a line around the block. It was 2.5 hours to get in and try this experience. Nobody came back a second time. And the experience was sort of described as having somebody else's sneaker on your face. The graphics were very, very clunky. I was running on an IBM 286 PC, but the sound was very good, and everybody sort of agreed that having high quality sound really improved the experience of the visuals. But my takeaway from that was I was really too early for VR, or it was too early for me, and I decided to put it on the back burner for a few years. But I did, however, in the process, get hooked on programming. I worked with a programmer on that. I don't code myself, but I would look over this programmer's shoulder and come up with ideas for how he should write his program. And so in 1992, early 93, I formed my own tech company in Silicon Valley called Beatnik. And we had 23 employees, of which 12 were called Chris, collectively the Chris. And we had a small office in San Mateo, California. It was sort of a low-rent office, actually on a street corner in San Mateo, upstairs from a titty bar, which was sort of interesting. It made it quite easy to get venture capitalists to come and visit us for demos. Our product was a software synthesizer called the Beatnik Player. And Beatnik was a software synthesizer. You probably know about Reason. I know some of you guys use that. It was in those days there were early examples of software synthesizers that would run in your DAW, but unlike Propellerhead Reason, which would always be designed to take advantage of the maximum processor power on the state-of-the-art computer of the day, ours was designed to have the smallest possible footprint and be as efficient as possible. And the reason was that we designed this to play on the web. So if you went to what we called a sonified web page, the Beatnik player would download to your browser in the background as a plugin, and then anything you clicked on in the page would be generating sound and music in real time. And like HTML, you know, the code behind a web page, you could be affecting the key or the tempo or the instrumentation of the music in real time as you moved around the page. And so the Beatnik player was very, very efficient. During the course of the 1990s, Beatnik had incredible launch parties and press releases, and we had booths at Las Vegas and at the CES show, and we gave away berets and mouse pads and t-shirts, and we blew through millions of dollars of venture capital money and had absolutely zero revenue. And so like many dot-com companies, we would have gone up in smoke at the end of the 90s when the bubble burst. And I was actually all prepared for that and prepared to get back to my first love, which was music, were it not for the fact that we had one deal that actually made some sense, and that was with Nokia phones. And Nokia came to us in 1998 looking for a software synthesizer that would play ringtones in their phones. Nokia at the time had 43% of the world's market in mobile phones, and they were seeing phones coming out of Japan and Asia that had a Roland or a Yamaha MIDI chip in them that were playing ringtones, but they didn't want to waste a couple of dollars per unit on a Yamaha chip, so they needed somebody to do it in software. And the processors in their phones are very puny, but we were able to port the Beatnik player to Nokia's processors and play 4 notes polyphonically of MIDI. So they licensed it and they installed it in their phones, and they also commissioned me and a group of composers at Beatnik to program their default set of ringtones, including the infamous Nokia Waltz, which is which is now sung by domestic common or garden birds in European countries, because they imitate the most played jingle ever. So the phones got more sophisticated and they started to play more channels. They went up to 16 channels, and they started to have the ability to play samples as well as MIDI notes. And so the ringtones got more sophisticated. And by the middle of the 2000s, not only Nokia, but most of their competitors had licensed the Beatnik engine. And so my little synthesizer was now in over 2 billion phones around the world. So I had mixed feelings about this, because on a certain level, it was the most successful synthesizer ever built. The flip side was it didn't sound very good. And I had a bad feeling about this, because I was supposed to be the guy that brought warmth and humanity to electronic music, right? So I wasn't sure how I felt about these bleepy ringtones everywhere. But it was fairly short-lived, because it didn't take long before people's MP3 song libraries, you could start to use those as your ringtone, and smartphones became more common, and there was less and less need for the Beatnik synth. So in the middle of the 90s, I decided to step back from all of this. I'd sort of had enough of technology for a while. Being an entrepreneur was really a helter-skelter ride, and I had the stability to not have to worry about working for a while. So I went back to my native England, and I have a house on the coast of Suffolk there, which is very low-lying, and I wanted to build a studio and start making some more music again. The problem is we flood every few years, and so I decided to build my studio in a 1930s lifeboat. So it's a fairly low-tech studio. It's actually powered entirely by a wind turbine on the mast and solar panels on the roof. And I was very happy to just sit there and create some new music for a while and do some new filmmaking. In the interim, filmmaking equipment had also become very cheap and accessible. So you can now not only make an album in your lifeboat studio, but you could also go out and make your own film, get it shown at film festivals. And so I went back to sort of the DIY ethic, which I'd always loved. Well, I was very happy to do that for a few years and spend time with my family. I've got 3 kids that are now in their 20s in the UK. But about 4 years ago, I became interested in teaching. I'm from a very academic family. My father and his father were all Oxbridge professors in the UK. My mother taught statistics. And so I was thinking about teaching and thinking that maybe the next phase of my life, instead of exploring some new avenue, maybe I'd like to pass on some of my experiences to the next generation. And so in 2014, I was invited by Johns Hopkins to come and visit, and I came here to Peabody, and they were interested in having somebody teach film and TV music to both Peabody composers and their filmmakers. And they had also just received a large endowment in order to create the Film and Media Center in Station North, which is about a mile north of here, between here and the main Hopkins campus. And so in this rather lovely Art Deco cinema, we created a new Film and Media Center in conjunction with MICA, which is a local arts college. And we installed a state-of-the-art studio, And I would teach classes of a mixture of filmmakers and Peabody composers how to compose and do sound design for picture in film and TV. Well, Peabody asked me whether I would like to turn this into a full-time course at Peabody. And I was very interested to do that. But in discussing it with them, it really occurred to me that Peabody, which is, as you probably know by now, is the oldest music conservatory in the USA and one of the most respected. It really seemed to me that Peabody was graduating fabulous orchestral musicians for whom there were not really enough seats in professional orchestras. And I asked them, well, what do your graduates end up doing if they can't get jobs in orchestras when the stats are not very good for those, the probability? And they confessed to me, well, some of them go on to different careers altogether with a Hopkins degree under their belts. Some of them sadly end up, teaching piano to their neighbors' kids and so on. And I just thought, well, if you're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a career at university doing the thing that you love, you want to come out of it with skills that are actually pertinent to the workplace and the demand in the workplace for those kinds of skills. And so I advised Peabody that the areas for them to move into would be things, not only film and TV, but also things like games and VR, and location-based entertainment. Loudspeaker arrays are increasingly important. And it brought me back once again to look at the thing that I hadn't really thought about since 1992, and that was virtual reality. And I've always found virtual reality really fascinating. But one of the things I find fascinating about it is that if you have spent your life or your career working on linear media, in other words, film and TV, as a composer, you have a rigid framework on which to hang your music, right? So you get a rough cut of a film or a piece, and the director will sit there and spot it with you and will tell you what they're looking for from this scene. They might say, for example, I would like the music to enter gently right after he slams the door, and then to be building as they're having the argument, and to hit something of a peak, when he screams at her, and then to calm down and this sense of triumph as they are reconciled, and to leave out on a positive note. That's good direction from a director. Bad direction would be, oh man, I'm thinking of some strings and a choir, maybe a piano coming in. You don't really want that kind of direction, right? You just want the director to tell you what they're looking for from a scene. So as a composer, over time, you learn 1,000 different devices of ways to do things. I was just describing to one of you this morning. Okay, so the director wants a sense of wonder because you've just discovered, a lost city in the jungle. How do you convey a sense of wonder as the clearing opens up and we get our first glimpse of this fabulous city? Well, a composer instantly thinks of the scale or the key, that you might be composing in. You might be thinking of instruments like a harp flourish, and maybe some sort of distant flutes for the ethnicity of it. So you have this whole language that you develop of the way that you will answer the need of the particular scene. It's not about writing your masterpiece. You're not writing a symphony that's going to get performed at Carnegie Hall and you're going to be a world famous composer. It's like lighting or makeup or props, wardrobe, all the other components of the film that go to create this sort of sense of reality. Well, if you now get invited to do the soundtrack for a VR experience, you don't have a director there telling you, how the scene's going to run. It's basically the player, the user, is going to dictate the choices that they make in this world. The whole point of doing VR or a game is that it's now no longer somebody else's decision how you spend your time. Now you, the user, are the one that gets to decide. You could choose to spend a time exploring this city or this underwater scene, whatever it is. There's a puzzle. You could choose to solve the puzzle, or you could go chasing the trophy and get into a battle with a ninja. It's really up to you how you spend your time. So as a composer, how am I going to enhance that? Well, basically, all of those smarts that I've acquired from the linear world, all of those 1,000 devices, I need to somehow put those into the game engine itself. And that's really challenging. And there's no rule book yet that will tell you how to do that. There's really nobody qualified to teach you that either, including myself. So we're going to figure that out together as a class. So that's really the philosophy behind the class. So you guys will get to see around the school today. You won't get to see the media lab because it hasn't been built yet. It's going to be built this summer. This semester, that room is being used for keyboard studies, so it'll get gutted as soon as the semester is over, and our new lab will be built. This is just an architect's impression of it. Basically speaking, there's 12 workstations around the room. There is a multi-speaker array. There will be game platforms like Xbox or PlayStation VR, as well as some PCs. But basically, you'll be working on your own MacBook laptops, and you'll bring your work in with you to the class. When you plug into your workstations, you'll have a monitor, headphones, speakers if you need them. And the instructor will be able to pick, let's say, workstation 6 and put the graphics and audio up on the main screen. So here's an example of the kind of class that we might do. In the first year, I'm going to be focused, mainly on linear media and the traditions from the last few decades. So we might look at a scene from a movie, which I have, which has dialogue and sound effects, but no score. I might play the role of a director, where I will say to you, okay, here's what I'm looking for from the scene. And then you will have, via the network, that scene on your own workstation, and you'll have an hour and a half to come up with a cue for the scene. We might spend the last 45 minutes of the class looking at some examples, putting them up on the screen, and critiquing each other's work. And as I say, we're not trying to compose a symphony here. Doing a whole movie would be ambitious, but what you would be doing is starting to broaden your own vocabulary of how to achieve certain emotional or dramatic effects using the music that you use. And very often, where you start the music, where you end the music, where you go to silence, the way you mix it behind the dialogue. The dialogue's the most important, right? You can't mess that up. So sometimes you've got to pick your instruments and your registers in order to not mess up the dialogue, the intelligibility of the dialogue. But if it's a scene that has a panoramic view outside, then that's a great opportunity to show off a little bit. As a composer, you get to shine a little bit. So in the first year, we'll be doing a lot of analysis of existing shows, of composers, ranging from something like Bernard Herrmann, who did all of the Hitchcock films and started with Citizen Kane, ended with Taxi Driver, incredible career, great composer, through to, a John Williams on a Star Wars or Harry Potter score, or Hans Zimmer, and some of the, contemporary composers who are sort of getting beyond that classic era, like Trent Reznor, who did Social Network. The whole of Social Network is scored using source music, which is the music coming out of the speakers in the restaurant he's in, or the computer speakers when Mark Zuckerberg's programming his sound. Almost the entire score is done using source music, which is sort of called scorce music. So we'll look at some conventional media like that, and then progressively through the first year we'll start to learn some of the interactive tools, the nonlinear tools, and then really from year 2 onwards you'll be working more in the area of real-time game engines and virtual reality and so on. So the lab's going to be very kindly equipped by some of the companies that we're working with, people like Google, Microsoft, Apple, Sony, Facebook, HTC, and so on. And so we should have a very nicely equipped lab. That said, by the end of your 4-year career here, the whole landscape will have changed. So, we're going to keep swapping out this equipment and this technology as we go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the industry, especially with parents here. You want to know that your offspring are going to be on a good career path. And this was a lot of my objective here at Peabody, was to help with a wider range of career paths and make sure that you get value for money. Now, all of this is going to be based on a great fundamental music training at a conservatory like that. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. But what is new to this is such a strong focus on your employability, by the time you graduate. So I just want to show you a few boring statistics. As of about 10 years ago, the games industry has outstripped both the movie and the music industry in terms of overall revenues. And although this is music overall, if we're classical music we're talking about, the line would be down here somewhere. Now, this is not in and of itself a reason to decide to do game music. In fact, I would encourage you to still pursue film scoring as well, especially because although the number of Hollywood movies made per year has stayed fairly flat for the last couple of decades, the number of indie movies has absolutely blossomed. And a lot of the reason for this is, again, the equipment has gotten so cheap. If you've got a $5,000 Canon DSLR and somebody else's credit card, you can go make your 90-minute zombie indie movie and maybe get it shown at Sundance and win awards. So the barrier to entry has really come down. It's not just the Hollywood system that is making these films. Many of those film productions, and there are hundreds of them per year around the world, are not going to have a huge budget for music. So they'd love to have somebody in a back room with a workstation bang out a soundtrack for them. They're probably not going to have the ability to afford a full orchestra and so on. But there are a lot of opportunities like that. And in order to pursue a career in that, you need to be something of a self-starter. It's no good just trying to get a Hollywood agent to get you these jobs. You need to get on your bike and go to Tribeca Film Festival or Sundance or Toronto or some of the European ones and try and corner an up-and-coming director or film star and persuade them to listen to some of your music and maybe hire you for their next project. But even though I think indie films are doing well, it's basically games that are eating the world. So the video games market is absolutely exploding. And in the experience I've had in games, I see people in jobs doing audio, doing sound design, mixing, composing for games that are frankly enthusiasts. Some of them are very, very talented, but almost none of them have a qualification to do what they're doing. And that is because there haven't been courses like this, especially not at top US universities where you could qualify to do this. So by the time you guys graduate, and even before then, I actually believe you're going to be in great demand. I think the demand for the skills that you're going to learn here will really outstrip the supply. And I think if you went into an interview with a Peabody degree and you'd learned the same tools that these guys are using to develop their products, I think you'd be in very good stead. Within that space, one of the most booming areas of all is virtual reality. It's been a little bit stop-start with VR, but it seems to be really pushing across the chasm now, and companies like Sony and Google and Facebook are making sure that this is going to go mainstream in the next few years. Moore's law is taking care of some of the problems with resolution and frame rate and things like that. The headsets are getting more affordable and less clunky. Soon they're going to be untethered. You won't have wires coming out of the back of your head. It's all going to get better quite rapidly. And when you look at the companies that are at the pinnacle of the VR universe, it's people like Google and Microsoft and Sony and HTC. These are all the same ones that we're working with to equip the labs. And the fact that we're part of Johns Hopkins is a big hook for them because they're interested in medical aspects of this. You know, they don't want people getting nauseous in VR. They don't want kids falling out of windows or tripping over their couches. So Johns Hopkins has a role to play in that. Plus, there's a lot of development going on the medical campus in the area of simulations, of remote surgeries, telepresence as it's called, and analysis in VR. So we're in a very good place for that. So the consumer adoption of VR, what kind of content is there, and is it good enough? I don't think it's really good enough yet, and no big surprises what sorts of experiences are really driving the adoption of consumer VR. Quite predictable, right? However, the good news is that there are also some rather wonderful, much more tranquil experiences, educational, atmospheric, And VR is especially good at sort of giving you this sense of immersion. Now, if you're a composer and your rough cut comes over and you see a shot like this, your heart leaps. So the reason is that if you're scoring a movie and you get a grand panoramic shot, it's really an opportunity to go to town. And many of the Oscars for Best Movie Score over the years actually went to the same film that won for Best Cinematography. So it's The Last Emperor, Dances with Wolves, Out of Africa, etc. Because when people see a big panoramic shot, they're very open to the music. They're very aware of the music. So it's great to be able to score a VR experience like this. The downside of this kind of VR is that it's often not interactive at all. It's this wonderful browsable space, but as an individual, I have no effect on the space. It's like I'm a ghost. It's called the Patrick Swayze effect. And a lot of that is going to change over time as more AI gets into games and virtual reality, and you will start to encounter characters within the experience who interact with you, and based on those interactions, the story could unroll, could develop in a variety of different ways. So one of the techniques for scoring games and VR experiences is called adaptive music, and I'll just give you an example of that. If you watch what's going on in this scene.
Vital signs normal. Detecting trace amounts of foreign bacteria. Continuing to monitor. Near blueprint acquired. Oxygen. Oxygen.
Okay, you get the general idea. So that game was scored using a piece of software called Elias, and I just wanted to explain to you a little bit about what Elias is. On the surface, it looks kind of like Ableton or something like that. So you have chunks of either audio or MIDI loops that you can place in a sequence like this, but you can layer them and have the layers be switched in and out by calls from the game. So I'll give you an idea of how that works. I'll just go to level 1 here and play the piece. So now these are the components that we're hearing. As we change levels, new tracks will get switched in. And then on a successive level, I can step it up a little bit. I can use stingers to do the transitions. Needs a bit of tweaking, right? But what's going on there? So like many workstations, you know, I've got a mixer, I've got these chunks of either audio or MIDI. What's different is that I can set up these action presets and I can expose them to calls from a game. So Unity is a game engine and development environment in which, you know, roughly half commercial games are made these days. And it has a plug-in architecture which allows this Elias software to act as an audio middleware. So let's say we're working, one of you is composing the soundtrack for a game from a game developer in North Baltimore, and they'll give you access to their Unity project, and you open Elias as a plugin within that project, and then you're able to get calls from the game saying, you know, we've reached our objective, we're going to level 2, here's this character we're interacting with, start the chase sequence, enter combat mode. Any calls you can get from the game you can convert into musical interpretations. Now, I mean, that was fairly mundane music, right? It's basically a drone with a few extra parts, kind of predictable, no chord changes. You guys can do better than that. I know you can do better than that. I could do better than that, given the time. But the point is that you don't have to do this sort of, you know, predictable approach. You could start with just a solo flute, like a mysterious flute. On another track, you could have a harp flourish. You could have different themes for characters within the game. But as composers, you would be designing those themes knowing that they're going to interact and overlay in this world. So you would come up, you need to take a sort of 3D approach to your composition. Now this is a tool that would make that relatively easy. It might fall short of your ideas of what you want to do. But the good news is that we're working in the same environment that these commercial products are being made in. So just imagine a couple of years from now, you're looking for a summer internship job. You go to Electronic Arts or to Activision or to Sony, and not only are you a composer who can play them some great compositions, but you also already know how to use the tools that they're developing in. I guarantee you there's nobody else that's going to walk in there that has that kind of qualification. And when they hear that you're from, you know, a great conservatory, it can only help. So I think this is going to be a huge benefit to be learning these tools. Once again, the tools may have changed again by the time you graduate, but we're going to make sure that we keep step with all of that. Okay, let's see. I just wanted to touch briefly. I know that some of you are game players, but had mentioned that you're more into platform games. I've got nothing against platform games, and you know, I loved Mario and stuff back in the day. This was a game that I particularly loved the soundtrack to, called Undertale, and I think the soundtrack is a work of genius, and I'd urge you to check it out. So Toby Fox, who programmed this, he'd raised some money from Kickstarter to do it, and he's the composer as well, and it sold 1 million copies and won all sorts of awards, and it's sort of an inspiring story because he's really, you know, a one-person band, and I really think the music is great. So maybe some of you will design your own games or find a game designer within Hopkins. At the Whiting School of Engineering, there's a game design degree, so we'll be collaborating with some of those guys. And at the Film and Media Center, there are people doing 360 VR films. So there's lots of opportunities for you as composers to find good collaborations. I just wanted to talk a little bit about AI because I think, you know, VR is not going to get really exciting until there's more AI. And this makes me think of the fact that, you know, 80 years ago, when cartoons were scored, there were people creating orchestral works that had to match every single gesture and expression and every action within a game like this.
Are you okay, Tom? Speak to me, pal. Speak to me.
So when you think of the effort that went into composing, arranging, and the skill required to actually have an orchestra play that stuff in one take in real time, I mean, it's just astonishing. But you see what I mean about all of those decades of linear scoring talent, you know, have to come over into the game world in real time. And by comparison, you know, the characters in animation that you're seeing in VR are relatively simplistic.
What the hell is it? I hope it's not radioactive. Just kidding. Touch it. It's cool. Why don't you look for a girlfriend?
So, you know, in terms of AI, we're barely at a sort of Alexa level yet in VR, but I do believe that's going to change very rapidly. But while we're waiting for that stuff to change, you guys need to be learning these tools. And I want to show you a little bit of Unity. This is a guy who just did some spatial audio in Unity, but the fact that it's just the sound effects, I don't know if you'll hear the spatialization in this room, but have a think about how you would add music to this.
All sounds were routed through an audio bus in Wise with the RO 3D plugin for spatialization. I strategically placed sound emitters in Unity and used Wise to customize attenuations.
This is the kind of Unity project that you would get
Finally,
to work with.
I used optimization techniques such as occlusion culling to render only what's necessary in order to maintain a steady, high frame rate. I will end with a few minutes of gameplay. My name is Sean, and this has been my VR game development and 3D audio implementation demo reel using Unity and Wise. Thank you for watching.
So it's really a blank canvas, right? And hopefully it got you thinking about some musical ideas. But, you know, a question with VR is, are we trying to create a sense of a new reality, an immersion, a realistic world? And if so, does it need music? You know, and if it needs music, should there be an orchestra playing in the background telling you how to feel about this stuff? And again, it really brings you back to the fundamental questions about why you use music in media at all. as I mentioned, it's not always for very glamorous reasons. It's not because you're trying to create a masterpiece. It's for fairly, mundane logistics like establishing time and place. If we're a nighttime scene in the streets of Vienna, what century are we in? Well, I don't really know until I hear that rap beat coming out of a passing car, or until I hear harpsichord music, which lets me know that this is a period piece. You're on a beach, swaying palm trees, waves breaking on the shore. What continent are we on? Is it the South Seas? Is it the Mediterranean? Is it South America? Well, if you play Hawaiian guitar music, you might have just saved your production a couple of $100,000 because you actually shot the scene in the Florida Panhandle, but it was the Hawaiian guitar music that sold you the idea that we're actually in the South Seas. So, very often that's the role of music within a scene. Setting the mood in advance of a scene, heightening the drama. Obviously, an obvious example of that is a fight scene or a car chase or whatever. Identifying individual characters. Often the central characters in a movie have their own themes. If there's a love thing going on, maybe there's a little duet that they play. You can create empathy or for that matter, suspicion for a given character using the music. Sometimes you can provide cohesion and flow. In a montage sequence, think Rocky when he's training, there's these awkward cuts going on, but the music sort of propels you through the edits. It can add subtext, it can suggest something that we don't see on the screen. That dive scene, if I'd played some lurking low cellos and basses churning away in the background, you would know that there is a predator lurking. That's subtext. Sometimes it's, to cue song and dance, to cue comedy, or even to relate to a demographic. The producers might say to you, they might tell you the kind of demographic they're trying to attract. If you're scoring Black Panther, then obviously you make specific choices according to, the kind of audience that you're hoping to attract. So all of these fundamentals are going to stay true through the next 4 or 5 years of your degrees. The technology is going to change, undoubtedly. I don't know where it's going to go, but I know for a fact that the goggles are going to get cooler. These are the Magic Leap goggles, which use lasers to project images directly onto your retina, which is a little bit unnerving. But you could see that, the specs are going to start to get cool like a pair of Ray-Bans. In fact, it might be Ray-Bans making your AR specs in 4 or 5 years. Or maybe we'll just have neural implants and we won't need specs at all. The interim might be smart contact lenses. So you can get these contact lenses that not only will show you your text messages, but will also correct your vision in real time. The oral equivalent for the smart contact lenses are what's called hearables. And these are starting to appear now. They are earbuds which need to be personalized to the shape of your ears in order to block out 100% of sound. They will be wireless, they will be head tracking, so they'll do your spatialized sound in VR or AR. They may also replace your Fitbit and take your pulse rate or your blood pressure. They may even translate languages in real time. So I had a student in here yesterday who's a big-time gamer, and he plays against people that don't speak English very well, and he wants to go and meet them wearing a pair of these so he can translate Hungarian into the English. I think that these wearables are definitely going to be a thing by the end of your degree. So just to wrap up, I'm just going to go through some of the specifics of the new media degree. You may have seen this information before, but you may have questions for me about it. So the Music for New Media degree is a 4-year Bachelor of Music, maximum of 10 to 12 students per class. You know what we're going to be focusing on, initially on linear media, but increasingly on non-linear environments. In addition to my class, you'll be doing core conservatory subjects, such as ear training, sight reading, theory, composition. You have the option to carry on high-level instrumental or vocal training if you want to keep up your instruction. Some of you may have considered a dual degree with performance if you're really serious about it, but even if you don't, you would be eligible for the orchestras and ensembles within the school, of which there are many. You can take private lessons with the fabulous faculty here at a discount price if you want to carry that on. In addition to the required units in my course, you can do electives additionally in recording arts if you're into being a sound engineer or producer, computer music, some of which happens in this room, acoustics or composition. Double degrees are possible with other schools at Hopkins. If you're really nuts, you might want to go be a medical student and do this. I don't know about that, but it is theoretically possible. And in your final year, you will do a capstone project in collaboration with one of those other schools. As I mentioned, you might team up with a game designer from Whiting, or you might work with the medical campus on, let's say, music and wellness, or using VR for stroke victims or geriatric patients, or to calm kids down before they go in to see the doctor. You might use EEG, you use brainwaves to affect your music. Or you could work with the Film and Media Studies School, working with an up-and-coming filmmaker to score their piece. It's a little bit hard to read this curriculum, and it's also a work in progress. I'll be happy to share this with you in probably a week or so when it's finalized, or put it on the website. But just to give you an idea of how to read this, so it's year 1, semesters 1 and 2, year 2, year 3, year 4. This is the summer before your 4th year. So this is my class in here, which would take place once a week, an extended class in the lab. Then in addition, there'll be monthly seminars with a guest speaker, for example, a game music composer or a sound designer from a movie or a 3D spatialization expert. The supportive courses that I mentioned are things like ear training, keyboard studies, and music theory. Recording arts, recording for musicians, you'll get an opportunity to get out in a professional studio and get the headphones on and play and perform in front of a mic, or to be in the control room acting as a producer or engineer working with musicians. You will do one course at the Film and Media Center called Introduction to Visual Language, which is really about storytelling from a film or TV or screenwriting perspective. Some humanities classes, which could be philosophy, history of art, science and religion, and so on. And then various other electives if you wanted to specialize in one of these areas. That's the first year. As I mentioned, these sort of morph into the second year. We get more into the tools. We'll be getting more into Unity and Elias, which I was describing to you. In the third year, you would do one-on-one mentoring with myself or another instructor. And typically, depending on what you need and what you want, I might sit with you at the piano and talk about, composing themes. I might sit at a workstation with you and help you learn how to make those crappy sounding MIDI synths sound like a real orchestra. But the one-on-one mentoring would happen in year 3. Year 4, as I mentioned, would be a capstone project, which your final grades would be largely based on. That would be a collaborative project that you make up yourselves. Could be done either here in the lab or at one of the other schools. There is a mandatory internship happens in the summer before your final year. So Peabody's on the hook to make sure that all of those placements happen at top quality companies or post-production facilities. But even before that, in the other summers or the vacations, we'll be looking for internship possibilities with the companies that I mentioned, and or with some of the local production companies. Students from here have worked for NPR in DC, Discovery Channel, HBO, some of the local recording studios and post facilities in Baltimore. And so it's very important to us that you have good internship experiences, which are going to increase your chances of getting hired there if that's the sort of career that you want to pursue. But it's also important that you bring back those experiences and share them with the rest of the class, because as you can tell, this is a class that is all about staying current with the industry and the state of the art. This is not a sort of academic scholarly activity that is sort of, you know, study in a bell jar. It's really about your employability at the end of the day. I think that is more or less all I have today. You guys probably have questions for me. Feel free to ask away. Yeah. Mm.
Does it react to things that the user doesn't necessarily do? So like if like a shark comes by or something, will it know that like something happened and like let you change the music for that?
So let's say that you were scoring a game in real time. So your friend is playing the game and you're sitting there with your pads and faders and so on, and you're watching what your friend does, and you're pushing up a fader or switching tracks or muting tracks. So in order to enhance the exact thing that they're doing, it's like, oh, here comes the shark, I'm going to push up these cellos over here, right? So all of that you can put into the game engine itself. So the game often will keep track of things like ammo, health, presence of friendlies or adversaries. But if you've played, you know, a zombie game, right, fiercer, hungrier zombies get sent at you, you know, as time goes on. You don't want to waste any time because the game is going to up the adversaries, right? Or you know, you're robbing a bank. You don't want to dilly-dally, you know, because it's going to send more sophisticated cops with better weapons and so on. So the same game engine can make calls to Elias, and the game engine won't determine what you, the composer, choose to do with those calls. But if you decide, okay, when the shark comes in, I want to fade up this cello track, then Unity will send you that call, and in Elias you'll say, oh, you know, shark track, and Elias will interpret that by steadily pushing up the cello fader. I hope that makes sense. And the possibilities are really limitless. You know, I think the kind of thing that I showed you is fairly generic. It's better than indiscriminate music that just plays, right? But I think that if you got really clever with it, you could do amazing stuff with that. Any parents got any questions? Yeah. Yeah, because mine is a new program, so I'll have a maximum of 12 students in a class in the first year. By year 4, that would be up to around about 40 students and more faculty. At that point, we would have the bandwidth to offer my classes as an elective to students who are majoring in something else in the school. But initially, that won't be the case. So if a student went into composition, you know, Peabody composition, I would not have the ability to offer my classes as an elective until probably year 3 or 4 or going forward. The flip side is that if somebody enrolled for my class, they could take an extra elective in conventional composition. So you could sign up for a course in, let's say, romantic music composition for a semester or whatever it might be. You wouldn't be entitled to one-on-one instruction with a composition instructor. I think they might offer that as an additional fee, but you would be able to sign up for composition classes on a semester by semester basis.
But you have to apply to the course, so you didn't know about this, and it's too late for this year.
Oh, to apply to my course?
For this year.
Officially? I don't think the door is completely closed, because if a student had already been screened, had applied for composition and already been screened for that, then the school knows about them. You're in the system. You've maybe auditioned, you know, and so I think I wouldn't rule that out. But I think the official answer is no. You know, our application period is closed. In reality, again, because my degree course has no track record, we might want to fill those 12 places, but we might actually get, you know, 8 acceptances that we enroll. And at that point, we might say, well, we've actually got room for a ninth. So this person that applied for mainstream composition is now more interested in new media. So we could switch that over. So I think the answer is there's some flexibility there, but I don't really know the protocol, because this is a new course, so it's so new. But I wouldn't rule it out. Yeah.
In case that we can contact you, if there is interest.
Yes, definitely. Well, I mean, I think admissions in general here will know. If you want to give me your name afterwards, I could ask whether a note could be entered in the database, if that's something you're really interested in. Yeah. Yeah.
Will we be doing any coding, or is it all just directly from Unity to the program you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you are a programmer, right? Somewhat. Yeah, no, I mean, I would encourage that. I'm not a programmer. I've spent many years looking over a programmer's shoulder, but I'm worried that if I change like a semicolon, it's going to completely crash the system. So I don't touch it myself. But I'm very happy for you to do it. And in fact, I'd see the class a little bit like a software startup where people have different skills. So if a couple of students in the class are willing to do some coding from the ground up, then that's great. I wouldn't expect that of all students. What I would expect is that, to work in an environment like Unity, you have to be a little bit tech savvy. I mean, if you've ever built a web page, coded a web page, that's probably as much skill as you need, programming skill as you need. So it's more about sort of scripting and cutting and pasting, lines of code. But I would welcome anybody that wants to do some hardcore programming, yeah. And maybe we can build our own environment in Unity. Maybe we could have like a class VR space where everybody has their own room, and they write music for that room, and then we build like a Cartesian space that you can wander around from room to room. That would be great.
Probably have to add some variables. No matter what we're doing, we have to sync the variables between Unity and the program.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
You discussed a lot about collaboration with different areas within the school and which I think is really interesting and intriguing. How are those collaborations fostered? Is it initiative of the student to seek that out, or I was just curious about how those collaborations, how they get kickstarted.
I'll give you an example of a way that I would foster it, and that is I would take my class up to the Film and Media Center when they're doing a workshop on immersive storytelling, and they're all showing their first examples of VR films, and sort of encourage the students to just mingle and get talking, really. And I think a lot of it would be, picking out, for a composer to pick out a film that they take a fancy to or whatever. And in a way, that's good practice for going to the Sundance Film Festival and schmoozing with a director. So that would be one way to do it. With the medical campus or the more scientific projects, that might be a little bit harder. They might need to sort of maybe submit a paper with an idea, and we could figure out ways to get it published so it would be, get the right exposure in the right places. And again, I'll be contacting my opposite numbers in those courses, explaining what we're looking for. And I'm going to do that well in advance so we sort of get going up front. Yeah.
Is there something like this offered anywhere else that you know of that does have a track record?
I keep asking students that, and I've been worried from the beginning somebody's going to go, yeah, well, I've applied to, NYU and UC as well, but actually nobody has said that, but I'm sure they're not far behind. I mean, when I set this up, I thought, okay, you could go to Juilliard and maybe take a music tech course. I don't know. You could go to MIT and maybe carry on with trombone lessons. I don't know, but I couldn't really think of anywhere that you would go and do something like this. I know that there are schools that do film music composing. There are great places to do that. There are sort of trade schools where you could do video game composing, like a Full Sail or whatever. There are schools like Berkeley with 2 E's, where there's hundreds and hundreds of musicians and like-minded people that you could collaborate with, and large faculty, and you could do specialist courses in in any of these. They probably teach Elias, but I think there's a sort of holistic approach to this that it would be very hard to replicate anywhere else. Because we are a conventional conservatory in the middle of a school that is more research and scientific and medically based. So I think it's just a very rare combination of qualifications.
Well, I just want to say that when you showed that Undertales,
Yeah.
My son, I listened to in the car taking him to school once he gets his driver's license. This won't happen. All these soundtracks from video games.
Yeah.
And I recognized that without even like looking
Oh,
up.
really?
I'm like, okay, I think I know what that is. And then I saw that it's really interesting, really amazing.
Yeah.
This was very enlightening to
Good.
me.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Okay.